My guest on the show today is Ellen Hogan, and we are coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee, talking about the music industry today and sharing Ellen's story. So Ellen's going to be sharing about moving to Nashville, working in the music industry, and she's recently started a podcast for musicians that we're going to talk about. It's called Beyond Broke and Hungry, that she co-hosts with her friend Dara. And I'm excited for you to hear Ellen's story because I think it's inspiring to hear behind the scenes of what's going on currently in the music industry and just hearing from different people's perspectives. So I'm super excited to introduce Ellen Hogan. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody.
So you know what podcasting is because you have a podcast. So this is kind of cool. We're like blending these worlds of music industry and podcasting. And Ellen was just joking about being the comic relief on her show. So we might get some jokes. I don't know. We'll see.
We'll see. Now there's going to be a higher bar.
Yeah, there's no pressure here. I told her we're just going to share your story. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And so real quick, introduce our listeners to who is Ellen Hogan and what was your interest in like moving to Nashville? What was that like for you?
So I am originally from Michigan, and I went to college up in Michigan. I studied music. I was a voice major, but I always wanted to move to Nashville and be on the business side of the music industry. And so I moved down here after I graduated. I had an internship at a publishing company that, to be honest, it fell through almost immediately because they were like, oh, you can't get college credit. We can't have you here. I'm sorry, because we can't pay you.
Oh, no.
So I moved here for that. And then I just found myself waitressing for like 6 months, being like, all right, God, what's the plan here? What are we doing? And then I got another publishing internship with Wide Open Music that I did for about 6 months. And I worked with Jimmy Allen and Matt Stell, who are both country artists who are doing really well now, which is really cool. I helped Jimmy, figure out how to use Instagram, all that kind of stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I did that. And after that internship ended, I actually really missed performing. And I decided to see what was out there. I'd always been open to the idea of doing background vocals or being, a demo singer, things like that. But I didn't really have any opportunities to do that. And so I actually ended up joining a band because they were looking for a lead singer and it sounded right up my alley. And it was a band called Sunset East. And I played, and I was the lead singer. I played guitar as well, poorly. And we were on the road constantly. We were building it from the ground up from absolutely nothing. We started over once I joined the band. And then, about a year and a half later, it just it was time to be done. Things were starting to slow down. It wasn't as fun as it used to be, or it just wasn't going that great. And we just felt like we were spinning our wheels. And so we decided it was time to move on. And one of my bandmates, I remember we were sitting on his back porch with one of my bandmates and a guy who would often play lead guitar for us, and just hanging out and talking about what was next. And he just asked me, Ellen, what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, we could make like we could do like a duo project. And he's like, no, Ellen, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I want to be a manager. He was like, then do that. What are you doing? Like,
why are you here then? Yeah.
Right. And so I left the band, and I actually started doing some basically just volunteering, helping out with the manager of our band. He also managed another band named Dixie Jade, and I'd become good friends with them anyway. So I started working with them a lot and kind of acting as their day-to-day manager for a little bit there. And then I actually got a management job. Sorry, this is a very long story, almost.
No, I love this because it's a winding path, and it is so similar to so many artists that, try to do lots of different things, and then you end up with something totally different at the end.
Right. So I was working with Dixie Jade, and then I actually got, I guess we'll back up a little, in September when things were, I was starting to get a little frustrated with, not being paid and being like, all right, what am I even doing? I have been just spinning my wheels for the last 3 years at the time. Like,
And
God,
still
what do you...
waitressing at that point?
I only waitressed for about 6 months. I was actually doing sales for a vaping company, which is really funny.
That's hilarious.
But it
Something
paid
totally
the bills.
different. Yeah.
Completely different. So that was my day job that I did for about 3 years. And I was going into convenience stores. It was just the classiest job you can think of, but paid the bills and gave me the flexibility to do all these different things. So I, in September, just kind of was praying and thinking, God, like, where am I going? What do you want from me? Like, I'm kind of tired of the music industry. I'm tired of feeling like if you don't have the connections, you're not worth anything. Even if you work your tail off, it doesn't matter if you aren't in front of the right people at the right time. And so I was just getting really frustrated and, excuse me. And so I was like, maybe I could go into nonprofit work. I don't know. And I was like, God, if you want me to stay in the music industry, make it clear to me. And that weekend, I got a job offer, or an interview basically, that became a job offer with a management company out of LA. So I worked for them for a few months. It didn't end up being a great fit, but it was still like, Ellen, you are supposed to be here. You're exactly where I want you.
It was like a step in the right direction, even for a short time.
Exactly. And so that job ended in December, and I was again in this spot of, all right, still like, what am I going to do here? I actually quit my day job to do that management job. And now I was like, all right, guess I'll keep babysitting on the side and make that more of a full-time thing, work on this, this business that like God has given me an idea for, start a podcast with my friend Dara. Like, guess I'm just going to figure it out. And I did feel really at peace about it when I actually lost that job. And I remember my parents being like, oh, and it wasn't the right fit for you. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I know. But also, what am I going to do? How am I going to pay my bills?
Yeah.
So I went home for the holidays, and in January, I got a random text that was from a number I didn't have saved. And it just said, hey, this is Michael, IU Radio. Heard of a job opportunity in Nashville. And I was like, what?
Like, how did you find me? Do I know you?
And so I kind of thought it was like spam or something, or somebody that I had spoken with or reached out to for booking, because we, reached out to a lot of colleges. So I was like, maybe we reached out to somebody at IU, and I don't know. I'm like, well, I'm not in a band anymore, so I'll just leave it. And a couple hours later, I get a phone call from this guy, Michael Iurato, who apparently there was a typo in his text. And I actually had babysat for him about 6 months before, watched his daughter. He is based in New York, but he is a manager, and he works for a company called Indie Goot. And he was like, hey, I remember you said you were looking for a job, and I know somebody at Big Machine that's hiring. And so we're signing an artist together. We are having like a sound check in like an hour. You want to come and meet him? And I was like, okay, guess I'll be there in an hour. Yeah. And then I really quickly got this job at Big Machine, and now I'm assistant of A&R, and it's this crazy thing that came out of nowhere, and it was a total God thing, because I mean, that random text I wasn't gonna respond to.
You wouldn't have responded to, and then look at you now. Like, what an amazing opportunity. And I'm really glad that you followed like that trail of showing us like, I did this and this didn't work, and then I tried this and then this didn't work, because that is so real. Like that's real life, because especially with musicians and creative people, a lot of times we try things and it might flop, and then we try something else and we still want to do what we're passionate about. But like you said, sometimes you need to get a part-time job to pay the bills, or you need something temporary, or you need just something while you're starting from the ground up. And then I'm really glad that you went through that story and that part of where you got to this point, because if we started off the interview be like, hi, I work for a record label, people are like, oh, well, that's lucky, that's fancy, but there's so much hard work that went into where you are now. And I believe, what you're doing now is going to lead you to even better things in the future, because you're that type of person to just, be consistent and work hard, and you're putting out really good things. So whatever you do is going to be amazing. But I just think it's really cool at this point in your life, like to look back at what brought you here and realize like you would not have guessed even a year ago from now where you would be right now. So tell me a little bit presently what it's like working as an assistant in AR, because I think a lot of musicians don't understand the business side of things, which is what I like to highlight on the podcast, and like the behind the scenes of what a label does and what your job looks like, because there's so much that goes into it. And there's a lot of work behind the scenes that most people never see. So what's it like working for a record label?
So it's a lot different than you would expect. A lot of it is, putting together budgets for studio sessions, reaching out to musicians and getting stuff lined up, booking travel for musicians that are coming in to be in the studio, and also paying union contracts. I do a lot of that, like filing contracts for, the American Federation of Musicians, or AFTRA as well, which is the one for basically background vocals. And so I do a lot of spreadsheets. But I'm basically there for anything that my boss needs. I do a lot of sharing links with people. I'm one of the people in the company as A&R, which if you guys don't know, A&R stands for Artists and Repertoire. So I am basically in charge of the links and making sure that everything is secure, sending it out to who needs it, but making sure nothing gets leaked, things like that. So I am more on the rock side. My boss, he has all of the rock artists. So Big Machine John Barbados is the label that I work with primarily, but then we also have a few of the Big Machine Records artists as well, who are some of the country artists. He's really good at development with artists. And so
I knew about the countryside, and then when I met you, I didn't even realize they had the rock division and had rock bands under Big Machine. And so it's a label group, right? So you're under that label, but then you're working on the rock side.
And
really cool.
One interesting thing about the way that Big Machine is set up, it's actually I think it's technically an indie label where there's only about 120 people that work for the entire company. And that's including about 50 people that are in radio and aren't actually based in Nashville and are pitching to radio regions or territories. And so it's a very small company, and a lot of people work in multiple different individual labels within it. So I work mostly with BMJV and BMR, but there's also the Valerie Music Company, BMLG, there's BMLGR, there's all these, there's I think 7, I believe, there might be 6. But because it's a smaller company, we all come into contact with each other and with the higher ups often, which I think is really cool. And it's also interesting because, even in college, I was applying to internships and stuff like that at Big Machine and was always like, oh my gosh, I would love to work there. And here I am, 6 years later, and it's the right time. And this is where God has me right now. And it's really cool. So just being an assistant, most of my job is being by my phone and making sure that I'm available if my boss needs anything, but
yeah. And like you said, sending files back and forth and making sure that the people that need it get to it quickly, like sending it from the studio to the producers to the, the people that need to get it before it's out, but then you have to make sure it's secure so it doesn't get out to everyone else. Yeah.
Right.
There's a lot to think about.
Yeah. And I also do some work with label copy as well. So I will work with management or the artist to get, the lyrics and the rights and everything like that, and getting it all compiled into the label copy, which is what you see on, one of those old-fashioned CDs that no one's seen in years, or a vinyl, which is so
vinyl
funny.
Is back though.
I know, vinyl's back, baby. I love it.
Yeah, a lot of artists are coming out with a CD version and then a vinyl version, or like maybe a short one or a collector's vinyl version. And so it's kind of cool to see that coming back around. I mean, the hipsters have been into vinyl for a long time, but now it's like more mainstream. And so I think it's hilarious. I see like, I've seen it in the last couple of years, like teenagers at shows, and they're like, oh, I want to get this vinyl. And they're going out like finding record players at pawn shops and stuff so they can actually play it on something. Or people just hanging on the wall. I don't know. If you don't have a record player, then you can't really listen to it. I wonder if people actually stream it on their phones to listen to it, and then they just have the vinyl to get it signed or whatever. But there's so many options out there now. I mean, this is kind of a tangent, but have you seen like there's even little jump drives that people put their music out on, and just like different ways to get it to their fans. But I think there's just something special about you can hold it in your hands, you can get it signed, and people still want that. So,
and I am a sucker for vinyl. There's just something about like the crackle and just the way that it sounds, and you can't just skip through songs in the same way, which I really love. It's a totally
different listening experience.
Yeah, so it's a lot more intentional. And a lot of the time, for quarantine, I went home to Michigan for about a month, and my parents and I at night would sometimes just like have a beer and sit and listen to records, and you just listen to them top to bottom, and
as they were meant to be.
I think
musicians listening will appreciate that, because we work so hard at like if you are an artist and you're making an album with songs in a certain order to be listened to in that way, then it is such a work of art. And so it's like really neat to listen to it as it was meant to be.
Right. And I think right now the way that the music industry is working now and turning towards is singles. Everything is based on the single song, and there aren't really that many albums anymore. So when a really good album comes out, I get so
every
excited.
Song is like a top single that could be all by itself, but then in a collection it sounds amazing as well. Yeah. I have a question for you as far as working for a record label. When you tell somebody that you work for a record label or you work for a big machine and their first response is fill in the blank.
Oh, that's really cool. Wow. And you're just like, well, first of all, it is really cool. It's cool. Very exciting.
Yeah. But usually then the follow-up is, okay, so what does that mean? Right?
So what do you do? Like, what do you actually, what does your job actually look like? And I basically tell them what I just told you guys.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting with how many sides that I've seen at this point of the music industry. I mean, I did a lot of booking. I did a lot of, performing, and I did management stuff. And then now I'm on it. What's really cool is I'm really happy that I'm in A&R, because it's still very close to the music, and it's very based on the music. And I, press and PR and marketing and creative are all so important. But I love being on the music side, because that's like where my heart is,
Yes, I love that. Do you find that people find out that you're working at a label and they start pitching an artist? They're like, oh, you should listen to this music, or hey, could you put in a good word for this person? And you're like totally not on that side at all.
Well, that is something that like my boss can do. He's one of the A&R reps, but people do. They're like, oh my gosh, you need to listen to this person. They're so good. It's this independent artist that no one's heard of. And I don't have the power to do
that. I know. It's so funny. Yeah. I just wondered if people pitch you artists all the time, because they just think, oh, well, you might have an in, you might know who to talk to. And that's true, but you don't have like that decision making side of things,
Right.
because
And
it's a bigger process as far as signing people.
right. And I think that especially like the longer that I'm around, the more that Julian trusts my ear, which is really good. And so, you know, at some point, if there's an artist that I absolutely love and said like, hey, this one, there's something really special there, then that could be like something he would take into consideration, or
Like a
pitch
breakthrough
to our
artist.
CEO. Yeah. And because all the music that he gets, even if it's something that he loves, he still has to pitch it to our CEO, Scott Bruschetta. And if Scott likes it, then we're in business. But a lot of the time it'll get knocked out by one of the two of them because they both know exactly what they're looking for.
Has to be the right fit at the right time, like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting. Like I remember early on, Julian had our intern. He was like, I want you to pitch me a few bands or a few artists, basically so she could just get that practice under her belt of what that would look like to pitch to him and what he listened to alongside him and see what he listens for. And I thought that was really cool. And then he was also at the end like, all right, now if you're pitching artists to me all the time, there's something wrong. Like you need to have somebody that you are absolutely obsessed with, that you've been listening to for a long time, or even just that you discovered yesterday, but there's something about them that you can't stop listening to. But yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. Like, don't over pitch.
Make it a good pitch, right?
Make
so
it
people
a good
know
pitch.
that it's somebody that you believe in, and that, you know, like you said, you can't stop listening to. There's something special about them. Something stands out.
Right.
Yeah, that's really good. Man, well, I haven't even mentioned on the podcast yet that I just started working for a record label. So I'll mention that really quickly. I haven't even announced it because we schedule these interviews ahead of time. And so by the time this airs, it's, you know, a few weeks or a month later. So I just started working with a new record label in July. So there's a new label with a producer that I've worked with for a long time. They started a new country label, and it's called Black Ribbon Records. And they hired me on as the marketing director. So I'm in charge of like building from the ground up, setting up the foundational marketing things. And that's a totally different experience than you walking into a big, you know, system and organized thing that already has big artists and stuff. They're starting from the ground up. And so I'm doing a lot of the basic setups of like their website and their social media, their branding, helping, you know, set up with contracts. But then on the other side of that, I'm kind of where you're at, making spreadsheets. I'm making budgets. I'm like looking at options and figuring out, okay, what can we do on a small scale as we're growing? Like, let's start with one artist and then the next one, and then the next one. And so growing from that, I think is really interesting to see more on the business side and the more holistic view of what it's like to release music through a label. And so I'm doing a ton of research in the last couple months of that, and we'll probably be talking more about topics like this on the podcast just because I'm interested in it. I'm meeting more amazing people in the industry. But I noticed when I would mention to someone that I started working for a record label, they would immediately like pitch me an artist and say, hey, you should listen to this. Like, you should sign this person. I'm like, I don't really do that. Like, I'm marketing whoever the label signs, right? And it's their decision ultimately. But I do think there's just a lot of unknown around what a record label does for the artist. And then there's also like this thing, like you've probably heard stories of bands that get signed and then they get dropped, and then they have like, you know, sad stories about being on a label. And so there's that too, but there can be so much good that a label can do as far as pushing an artist and getting that radio play and, you know, having the network of all the radio stations and touring and stuff. So can we talk a little bit about what a traditional record label does for the artist when they sign an artist, like how they can help them? Because I think just having that basic understanding is really helpful as a musician who might be looking to get signed one day or might be wondering how that even works.
Yeah. So the biggest couple of things that a label does is, first off, the financial backing. So a lot of things that there's no way that you could afford to do 90% of the time, a lot of this is on loan. So it's something that you will end up paying back at the end of your deal, if it's not made back in sales, which a lot of the time, the majority of that is paid back already, whether through merchandise or album sales or what have you, TV placements. And so the other biggest things are just all of these connections that people in the label have to press and to TV and all of these different outlets that can get people hearing your music. And so with Big Machine, for example, we have an entire side that just focuses on press, and they just focus on, getting people on TV, getting people in articles, in features. And then there's also the stream team who focuses on, hey, we want to get on the best Spotify playlists for this genre. We want to get something going where Shazam is doing this new thing where if you search a song, you can unlock something, and with only some of the songs. And so getting deals like that set up, it's a lot of creative stuff, as well as putting together the photo shoots and things like that. So it's a little bit of everything.
So they have the financial backing to really give an album a good push, or as far as like setting up tours and stuff. But just those relationships of having the networks with radio and with press and knowing the people that are doing this every single day. I think there's so much value in just those relationships that are built over time. And then literally, I mean, it's in the name, you put that through the machine and you distribute it. And then the music speaks for itself, I think, after it's been put out to that many people. If it's good music, it's going to keep growing.
Right. And of course, there are so many more parts that I didn't touch on, like radio and things like that, where, terrestrial radio is still, it's still a big mover. And I know a lot of people don't listen to radio anymore. A lot of people go to Spotify, Discover Weekly or whatever, but a lot of people do. And still listen to it in their car when they're driving. I mean, I still listen to the radio, just trying to hear new music that I wouldn't have heard. And I think that there's so many different things that a label does that you wouldn't be able to do on your own, unless you have some killer management. And, a lot of things can get done if you have really good management that's working really, really hard, and then you have a really good press team. But all of these different things are kind of, the press, the radio, the sync licensing, things like that are all kind of encompassed in a good label. So.
Yeah. And so that's when it works well, when, you've got those teams backing you, and then the music goes well, and it can be a long-term thing. And one thing I don't think musicians understand about labels is that they will have a contract, but it is a business. So if at the end of that contract, if they're not making their money back or it's not doing well, they have to drop the artist a lot of times. And so they're kind of making a bet on you. They're like, we're going to put in this much investment and this much time, and then see where it goes. And then, at that point, they may have to drop somebody if they don't make the numbers and don't get those things. And so it's not saying that your music isn't that great, or that they don't like working with you, but it's a business too. And so I think a lot of people do get signed and then dropped later on, and they're like, what went wrong? So I hear a lot of stories like that.
Right. Sometimes it's just the wrong timing, where you have a great artist with a really good sound, but for some reason people are looking for a slightly different sound at that time. And with that, it just will just mean that, hey, no matter what we're doing, they're not getting the traction that we want them to. And that doesn't mean that they're not a great artist. We signed them for a reason. But we do want to keep them, we need to keep our company moving forward as well. As much as we want to promote them, we can't just keep losing a ton of money on them.
So what would you say is a good place for an artist to be when they're getting signed to a label? Because there's only so far that you can go as an independent artist, with your own time and maybe, someone helping you or maybe a small team. But if a song is getting a splash or they're building up an audience, they're getting some buzz, what have you seen as a good level for people to go from an independent artist to a signed artist?
That's really hard to say. And honestly, it's not something I'm a complete expert on. I've only been there for about 6 months. But what I can say from my experience as an artist as well and being on the management side is get as far as you can on your own and work as hard as you can, hustle. And I know I hate like hustle culture, which is a whole nother topic, but when it comes to your music, you really do have to work hard and you do have to pitch it to as many people as you can, as far as like press and radio and things like that, and getting really good performances under your belt, because you need to be great live. You need to have a tight band, have it together, have a great performance so that you blow people away when they see you live. But you also need to, a label isn't that worried about, you not having a great website. But in order to get fans and to get yourself moving up the ladder on your own, you do kind of have to do that. And so an interesting part of, doing everything on your own is, or I guess pre-management or pre-label, is that you would really have to take on all of these different things. And so you have to be pitching to radio. You have to be pitching to Spotify playlists. And those are all in their own worlds. I know with Spotify playlists, there are some that like charge you money to be on them, which seems a little scammy to me. But there's just all of these different ways that you can go about it. And I feel like that's probably another podcast for another time, but you want to get as far as you can and get as many fans as you can and have really good engagement. And labels will sign an artist if they're exactly what they want. They may not have a million, like when I say a million, they may not have 50,000 followers. They may have 1,000 followers, and maybe they just are completely like, they're not put together, but they're great live and they have a really unique sound, and they'll pick that person up regardless. But in general, you want to get as far as you can and be as prepared as you can. And you know what, like anybody that in the music industry, like I would ask for as much advice as you can, and to pitch to, either of us. You could send us an email and just say, hey, what do you think of this? Do you think I'm ready to pitch to a label? What are some notes that you have? And even if you have a ton of followers and, you're doing well on some fronts, if the music isn't good, the music isn't good. And
it does come back to the music. And I think that is encouraging for the musicians and the songwriters out there who are creating, that the music does make everything else work. And so I think it's interesting you brought up, like, the label has all of those things to push and to, get you out to the people, but the music has to be really, really good. And like you said, the live experience, like that stage presence, the connection with your fans, the connection with an audience is something that is way harder to teach than like how to get on Spotify playlists and how to get radio play. Like there's a lot of stuff you can Google and figure out yourself, but that raw talent and that that quality music really does go really real far. And I think that's exciting for musicians. And I know I'm passionate about independent musicians and helping with strategies and with marketing and promoting. I love that type of stuff because I'm like, I want to get that good music out to as many people as possible. And I know the struggles as an independent musician of, well, where do I find the fans? Where do I go? How do more people hear it than just my friends and family? Right. And so I'm really passionate about musicians, especially independent musicians, getting paid for their music and making it their living so they're not having to do these side jobs forever, these part-time jobs that aren't what they love. And so, segue, I want to let people know that you have a podcast all about that, and you
I
cover
do.
topics similar to that. It's called Beyond Broke and Hungry. So tell me about why you started the podcast and what it's all about.
So actually, I'm going to start with how Dara and I met. So Dara is now one of my best friends, but I actually met her. She lives in Jacksonville, Florida, and I met her when she was. My band was playing at a bar, and she was there with a bunch of her friends, and she was working in radio at the time. And she dropped her card in our tip tip bucket, whatever we had that day, and she, featured us on her radio station. And then we came back for a festival about 6 months later that we were playing in the area, and she had us on the station again, and she and I just hit it off. When we did that first feature, we never actually met each other, but that second time out, we have just been great friends ever since. And we are both really passionate about health and wellness, as well as the music industry, and having to work so hard all the time. And we came up with the idea of Beyond Broke and Hungry because everybody talks about the starving artist.
Yeah.
And there's so much of the, oh yeah, we're broke and we're hungry, but we're hustling. And you know what? Sometimes you do have to work a day job to get yourself by for a little while.
Yeah,
and
that's
what?
totally fine.
Yeah, that's totally fine. And there are a lot of, I don't want to say this the wrong way or sound like mean, but there are a lot of musicians that are playing to make money, and when it's not going towards their goals. So it can sometimes be, okay, I'm playing full time on Broadway in Nashville, and I'm playing 8 hours a day, and just until my fingers bleed and my voice is shot, and I really want to be an artist. That's probably not where you need to be then. Mm-hmm. Maybe you should try pivoting and going in a different direction, like work smarter, not harder.
Yes. I love that.
Where if, you're working 8 hours a day, are you really honing your craft, or are you just figuring it out as you go? And you know what, for some people, they are honing their craft and it's great for them. And some people just love playing downtown Nashville on Broadway. But it all just depends on what you're looking for, and to make sure that you are working in the right direction. But what we really focus on is how to achieve wellness, like holistic wellness, while you are trying to, do anything in the creative industries, whether it's be a musician, whether it's start getting on the inside of the music business, or if you want to be an actor or anything like that. And so we focus a lot on nutrition and mental health and things like that. And so this next season, which this is a little bit of a teaser, we haven't really talked about this anywhere yet, but
got a sneak peek here.
Yes, so this next season is going to be focused on nutrition. So we're going to bring in multiple different nutritionists, and some people talking about sports medicine, some people talking about sports nutrition, and some people talking about veganism and paleo, and different, just all of these different ways that people can eat to really take care of their bodies, but also touching on eating disorders and things like that, where we don't want food to be everything for you, but you need to take care of your body because you only get one, and it's a gift from God, and we want you to do your best to both take care of yourself physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. And that's a lot, and that in and of itself is a full-time job. And so it's hard if you are working a day job and you're trying to do your music career on the side, and you're trying to eat healthy, and you're trying to work out, and you're trying to have healthy relationships, and all of these different things at once, it can be a lot. And so that's kind of what our podcast is about, is slowing down and just using really simple tactics and really simple tips to make things easier, as opposed to adding another thing onto your plate. Because
I love that too. I'm so glad you mentioned like mindset and how you think about things, and then taking care of yourself so you can keep going instead of just burning out by working so hard and never taking a break. I think that's just a huge part of our culture, as far as like working all the time, and that's not healthy. It is good to take a break. It is good to rest, and I'm having to learn that as well, because I'm juggling all of these different things in my life too. And so when you're doing something you're passionate about, you will keep going for it, and you won't stop unless you make those times, if you set aside some time to actually rest. And so I think these topics are super important. And then the fact that you're applying it for musicians is really cool, because it gives specific examples, practical ways that people can change their routine slightly, add something instead of taking away, maybe, like I've heard people say, like, just add drinking more water and it's going to change your life. And so little things like that, being intentional, can really help. So I'm loving that you're doing that. I'm so excited for what's to come and can't wait to listen in. So I did want to send people over to listen to that podcast. You've already got a lot of episodes out and more coming. So I want to send everybody over to check out the podcast. It's called Beyond Broke and Hungry. Also, I want people to know how they can find you and keep track of what you're doing. So what's the best way for people to connect with you online?
So you can find me on Instagram. Well, first I'll pitch the podcast, which is at Beyond Broken Hungry on Instagram, and then Beyond Broken Hungry on Facebook. We do have a Twitter, and it has a shortened handle, which I will link in the notes because I don't remember exactly what it is. I think it's BYND Broke Hungry.
They don't give you as many characters on
Twitter. Don't give you as many characters for your handle, but
so maybe Instagram is the way to go.
And Instagram is the one we're the most active with.
Yeah, and then your Instagram as well.
And my Instagram is at Hello Hogan, HOGAN. So if you have any questions about music industry stuff, feel free to send me a DM, or if you say, hey, check out as we were talking about earlier, check out my music and let me know if you have any notes, or if you have any thoughts on what I could do better before I go into the next step. Because the worst thing that you could possibly do for yourself is to pitch too soon, or to pitch when you haven't found your niche. And I know pitching in and of itself is a hard thing, but
so getting some feedback is helpful.
Yeah,
thanks for being willing to do that. Well, I appreciate your time on this show to talk about your story and like your perspective in the music industry and what you're doing now. So thank you for all that you're doing. And I'm super excited for the future of the podcast and how it's growing. So I'm excited to send people your way. And thanks for being willing to be on the show today. This has been fun.
Thank you so much for having me, Lydia. It was a blast.
If you enjoy this podcast, I want to invite you to become a patron and join our community on Patreon for Rustic Songbird. You can check out all of the details by going to patreon.com/Rustic Songbird to support this show and be a part of our Patreon community. Thanks for watching the behind the scenes of this episode of the Rustic Songbird Podcast. You can check out all of the previous podcasts by going to rusticsongbird.com/podcast for interviews with people in the music industry to encourage you and inspire you to take that next step in your music career. I appreciate you watching this video, and I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel for even more videos like this coming soon. Make sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the bell to be notified every time we have a new video. All right, catch you next time.